huge news on WGDP, the legislation, the one-year anniversary, the partnership with the IMF. What is it all going to allow you to do?
Well, so this is the one-year anniversary of us launching W-GDP, which is the first ever coordinated all-of-government approach to women's economic empowerment. So we are really excited. We set ambitious goals to reach 50 million women in the developing world by 2025 through our programs, through 3 specific pillars. And this is the first annual report that shows that we've reached and impacted the lives of 12 million women in the developing world in the last 12 months. So we are incredibly excited, and today really is a time for us to come together, representatives from across government, Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Lighthizer, to talk about how we can increase access for trade and markets for women and women business owners around the globe, MCC, so all the relevant Mark Green from USAID to really talk about the progress that has been made and the path forward.
And this new act, bipartisan, that should codify WGDP into state. How does that work?
Particularly partisan climate, I am really humbled that we were able to get such strong congressional support for WGDP, and it's the result of 3 years of working with Congress, members on both sides of the aisle, to craft the initiative, to learn from them what has worked in the past and what hasn't, and really to create something new. So today, a bipartisan bill, aptly called the W-GDP Act, is going to be dropped by Senator Shaheen and Senator Lindsey Graham in the Senate. In a couple of days, there'll be a counterpart bill in the House, and it will, for the first time in the history of the U.S. government, codify women's empowerment as a foreign policy priority at the State Department and create the appropriate resources. So for years, since the Bush administration, there has never been an actual law that talks about the role of women, 50% of the world's population, arguably the most under-tapped resource in the developing world. And there's never been a priority with funds or with dedicated personnel at the United States State Department. So this will change that.
So you guys, on the road, you're going to Dubai this weekend. Yes. I mean, why, Kristalina, Dubai? I think of the Middle East, and I think actually some of the lowest labor force participation rates for women in the world.
Exactly for that reason. It is very important to concentrate on where the barriers for women are still the highest. And I want to give credit to the Middle East. They have taken very decisive steps to open up more space for women to participate in the economy. In fact, Women, Business and the Law, a publication that tracks how well the world is doing in terms of legal rights of women, listed among the top 10 reformers 6 countries from the Middle East: Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, going to Dubai, Jordan, Tunisia. What we are seeing is finally a recognition that if you want your economy to succeed, never mind which part of the world you are, you ought to give space for women to be part of it.
A lot of Kristalina has been such an amazing champion on this now, obviously, as the managing director of the IMF, but we worked very closely when she was at the World Bank. And it's actually that Women, Business and the Law report that's the underpinning of what's going to be a really landmark report that's being issued today as well. The WGDP index by the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House that actually goes through 5 of the most foundational legal barriers for women to work and quantifies the cost to the global economy of those barriers. So the 5 WGDP laws that we're seeking to change and working very closely with the IMF and Kristalina on, including in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Part of this trip is convening ministers from across the regions and heads of state to discuss areas where they have moved and areas where we'd love to see them move and want to support them in those efforts. So the 5 laws relate to the ability to travel freely, not just driving, but get a passport, mobility, more generally.
Without having to ask for permission.
Without permission
from father.
Exactly right. The ability to own, inherit, or manage property. Most people don't realize that in 75 countries across the world, there's at least one law prohibiting women from owning, managing, or inheriting property, access institutions. How can you start a business if you can't go to a court of law freely, if you can't create an LLC, access credit, and then work in the same industries as men? So 2.7 billion women are precluded from working in the same jobs as men. Oftentimes, Jordan just made a reform, which was very significant, because women weren't allowed to work after 5 p.m.
We actually today are in a situation in which, on average, women have only 75% of the legal rights of men in the world. And a very small number of countries have eliminated all barriers to women.
So you guys are teaming up actually and going at the government level.
We want to accelerate closing this gap for women everywhere. And actually in Jordan, we have integrated in a IMF program, $1.3 billion program, as priority the inclusion of women in the labor force, giving them all the legal rights to.
You know, the Trump administration, in the latest budget, as we've seen in previous budgets, wants to cut foreign aid. If you have a tough time taking this message on the road of international development, while at the same time sending perhaps a mixed signal there on aid?
I actually don't think it's a mixed signal. I think we have to be rigorous and responsible, define our priorities. We have to measure programs and make sure that we're funding those programs that actually have provable and measurable results. And then there are choices, right? And there's a difference, like I said, between aid, life-saving intervention, famine prevention, and development assistance. Development assistance is supposed to result in it no longer being needed. And that just doesn't happen in a lot of cases. So I think to the taxpayer, I believe that this is very aligned with the America First policy, because it's saying, look, we will support you, and we are proud of, for decades, being the most generous country in the world in terms of the assistance that we provide. Obviously, we have our priorities. The amount of intervention we're doing to help the people of Venezuela far exceeds previous budgets. So, you know, our development assistance and aid aligns with the president's goals and priorities, and where geographically it's core and most needed. But this aligns with America First too, because it can't be a one-way street. If there is going to be receipt of large-scale development assistance, there has to be cooperation towards achieving a result. And this is the first time through W-GDP the whole of government is organized. I mentioned the 5 laws. That's not all the laws that hold back women. There are childcare issues there. But if you can't access institutions, if you can't work in the same industries as men, if you can't own property, these are so foundational that let's start there rather than going a mile wide.